Welcome to this Pastel My Business online webinar. During this webinar, we will show you how to process and reconcile your bank and credit card transactions. We will also take you through the importing and mapping of your bank statement.
So guys, thank you for joining me. I'll be going through this session with you this morning. Now we are looking at your bank accounts. Now your bank accounts would include your business bank accounts, your petrol cards, your petty cash, your credit cards, and so forth. So these are all the transactions that will be processing that affects directly your bank, thus the bank accounts or credit cards. Now these transactions, typically you'd be looking at your payments. So if you're making your payments to your suppliers, or if you're paying for general expenses like your stationery, lights and water, your rents and so forth, or your mortgages and so forth. And also if you are paying off any other accounts which will directly impact or affect your bank balance and will show on your bank statement, then it will need to go through your bank account. Now on our previous session, we've gone through the whole setup from customer, suppliers, items to processing your stock items, buying and selling, and so forth. Today, we are looking at the next session, which is now processing your bank account. Now, there's two ways in which you can process transactions to your bank account. The first way is that under your customers option, you can process payments on your customers menu, and you can also receipts. You can pay receive money from your customers, which will automatically update into your bank account, or under your suppliers menu, you can also do your supplier payments there. As you can see, I've highlighted the supplier payments, and under customers, you can process your customer receipts. Now these transactions will go directly into your bank account, and while you're processing these transactions, you can choose to reconcile or not reconcile them, and reconcile them at a later stage. But we have gone through that in more detail previously. Now to access your bank account transactions, you need to go into your banking menu and click on the Process Bank and Credit Card options. Now when you select that option, it will bring you through to a window where you need to then specify the bank accounts and the transaction that you are actually processing. Now for the sake of today's session, I will just do a very basic typical example of a transaction that you would process through your bank account. Now on the screen that is displayed now, you are required to firstly specify your bank account. Now what we've added also on the application, just for your convenience, is the ability to add in new bank accounts on the fly, which is currently what I've highlighted. So if you are processing a transaction only to find that you have actually not created a bank account, rather than having you go back and going to create the bank account from scratch, you can add it on the fly. So you can add it on the screen so it automatically updates, and then you can proceed and carry it and process your transactions. But for the sake of this session, I will look at processing a transaction into my current account, which would be my business current account. So the first step would be to choose the cash book or bank account that we are using. So I'd select my current account. Now what you'll see after selecting the current account, immediately below it is the balance. Now this would be the balance of all transactions that have been processed into this bank account, including your customers' receipts, your supplier payments, and any other transactions that you have processed and that have been updated or processed into the bank account. So this will be the ledger balance of this specific bank account. On the right hand side, it gives you an option to show previous bank and credit card transactions. So if you want to see previous transactions that you have processed in this bank account, just to avoid things like duplication and so forth, so you know where exactly you stand and avoid, as I said, the duplication. So if I select that option, now what you'll see below is under the payments is you'll see all the payments that I've processed to my suppliers, and the fourth transaction there on the list is just a general expense account which I did previously. If I click on the receipts button, it will show you all the customer receipts that I've done that have been already processed via the customers and the supplier menu. Then we've got the transfer and the transfer out option. Now I'm going to take you back through to the payments before we continue. I'm going to deselect this option to show previous transactions. It will give you a confirmation window that all your changes will not be saved. You just accept that. Now what you have before we start entering the transactions is it will show you the date ranges on the right hand side. Now if you say show previous bank and credit card transactions, you can then specify which transactions you want to see. Would it be for the current month, for the previous month, or for the previous year? So you can specify a date range, and then Passel will list only those previous transactions that fall within the date range. But as you see, we are not using previous transactions, so that option is grayed out. Now on the payment side, I'm going to put through a typical expense transaction. So the first option on the payment side is the date, specifying the date. As you can see, it will always default to the current date, which is today's date. On the type, now what we've included here is the ability to pay your tax from your bank account. Rather than going through your accountant's area and process your tax payments and tax refunds, you can actually process your tax entries here. So this is a new feature which has just recently been added. Now you can either choose under the payment side to use a ledger account, which can be a general ledger account or an expense account or so forth, or it could be a specific supplier. So if you have not used the supplier menu, then you can process the supplier payments here. So you can choose to use a supplier and then the tax. But for the sake of today's session, I will use an account, and under the selection, then it will pull through a list of all the accounts that I can use. Now these are the accounts that I would have previously created that are available to be used. Now as you can see, I've got a list of all the accounts transactions here that I can choose. Now on the type, if I selected suppliers, it will show me a list of suppliers only. Now I will choose, let's say we are paying electricity and water, which is just a general expense for the general running of the business. I choose the electricity and water expense account, and I'll specify a reference. Now if I've paid by a check, ideally I'd like to see here a check reference number. But this reference number is solely dependent on you in terms of your business processing, what sort of reference number sequencing you would choose to use. So specify a reference number. Make sure that it has a reference number, because Passel will not allow you to proceed without specifying that reference number. And on the description column, then I can specify that this was a simple payment for electricity and water. So I'll just put in a description there as payment. Is tax applicable on this transaction? These are my tax options. Either I'm not using tax, therefore tax would not be applicable. Tax is at standard rate at 14%. It's zero rated or tax is exempt. Maybe for this specific transaction, be it you're importing, exporting, maybe it's an import payment that you're making and tax is exempt, then you would obviously choose the necessary tax type and proceed from there. But for the sake of today's session, we will use the standard tax rated option. Now, the bank exclusive or inclusive, Passel gives you the flexibility to either enter the exclusive amount or the inclusive amount. For the sake of this session, I will use an inclusive amount of 114 Rand, which makes it a nice round figure of 100 Rand exclusive and 14 Rand going into our tax control account. Now, the next column here, as you saw that it jumps through to the next column, would be the discounts. Now, discounts will not be applicable to your ledger accounts or your basic accounts. It will only be applicable to your payments to your suppliers and your receipts to your customers, where you are specifying a discount received for cash or discounts allowed for cash paid in advance and so forth. There's the tax amount, and at this stage I can choose to reconcile or leave that option as unreconciled. Then we have those two buttons on the right hand side, the plus or the minus, to add an additional transaction or to remove or delete a line. Now once I'm happy with the transaction, there it is, I'm happy with the transaction. Once I click on the process button at the bottom, then now this transaction will be updated into the bank account, and that bank balance on top will now be affected by this transaction. So it will increase by that amount. But I'll go through and do a receipt as well. So I'll go through and do a receipt, specify the date, specify the account as well. If I've, let's say here I've received money from one of my customers. So I'm here, I'm going to choose a customer. I'm going to specify Joe Soap as one of my customers. Under the reference number, I can specify that this was for a invoice 001 or whatever reference number you deem necessary. I can put in a description as payments, thank you. Now tax here, it will jump the tax column because Pestle will always look at tax on the invoice. So tax will not be applicable to your customers and also to your suppliers on the bank account, because tax will be taken into account when you do the initial invoice for your customers or your supplier invoice when you buy in the stock. As you see, that tax is not applicable and it simply jumps that option. Now the bank exclusive amount, I would specify the amount in here as 100 Rand. Because tax is not applicable, it will pull through the same amount. Now I can specify a discount. Now this discount amount obviously would be the amount that would have been in total owed by this customer. So this customer ideally would have had an invoice for a full amount of 110 Rand. Now I've discounted the 10 Rand and the customer is only paying me 100 Rand. And Pestle will then allocate the tax accordingly on the discount portion, and also tax will have been allocated from the initial invoice. So Pestle will do that for you, bearing in mind that Pestle is a full accounting package, so it will take care of your tax transactions when it comes to discounts and so forth. As you can see, there's no tax portion there, and you can choose to reconcile or not select that option to reconcile. Maybe you want to reconcile at a later stage and make sure that all transactions are in order. Now we're going through to the next tab on top, which is our transfers in. Now the transfers in and transfers out is primarily for transferring funds between your bank accounts. So if you want to transfer funds, taking it out of your current bank account and putting it into the petty cash for internal use, then this is where your transfers in and out will be applicable. Now just a typical example, I'll specify a date. I'd specify from which account. I would then need to specify from which account I'm transferring the funds out of. So I'm transferring from the business current account. Now the from reference number would be the reference number that will display on the transaction listing for the bank account that is transferring out. So the bank account that is transferring from, in this case, which would be my current account, this will then be the reference number that will show under that bank account. And on the transfer to, this will be the reference number that will be applicable to the account or the bank account receiving the funds. So here I'll just specify the petty cash. I'll specify a description, the amount that I'm looking at transferring, and yet again I can choose to reconcile or not reconcile this transaction. Now, bearing in mind that this is the transfer in or transfer out option, then I would then need to do the other leg of the transaction where I would do the transfer out. Actually, it was my mistake. I should have initially started with the transfer out and then do the transfer in. Then here, the transfer in would be it's coming into the petty cash account, and specify the reference number here. And the account that it's going out of, which would have been the business check account, the reference number there, specify the same description, and the same amount of 200 Rand, choose to reconcile, unreconcile the transaction. Now you can have a list of all your transfers in and out, so you can update them all as one complete batch. Now, I've got payments, I've got receipts, transfers in, transfers out, I'm ready to process. I can either click on process to exit this window, or process and new to then go and process my next transaction to my next bank account or the current bank account if there's still additional transactions. Now I click on the bank account, it gives me a confirmation window that I am transferring the funds to the same bank account. So just to avoid the duplication, it will give you the confirmation window. Now that you've processed the transactions and they have been updated into your bank account, now what we're going to look at is importing your bank statements, which is an awesome functionality which allows you the flexibility of rather than having to capture transactions one by one as I've done here, you can just simply download your bank statement from your bank account. Simply download your bank statement from your bank account, save it in a specific format, either CSV or OFX format, and save it onto your local machine, either onto the desktop, onto My Documents, or wherever you will be able to locate and find it, and then simply import it. And then Pastel will simply go through the downloaded list of transactions and import those transactions for you. Takes out the fuss of having to go through the transactions and specifying reference numbers and amounts and so forth. It just does the job for you. It's absolutely phenomenal. Now, to access this importing function, you would click on the importing of bank statements option. I simply select that option. Great. Now that I've selected that option, it takes me to the window which I currently have, where I then need to again specify the bank account, the format that I downloaded the bank statement to, and then continue with the import from there. Now I'll use my current account yet again, just an easy example to use. As soon as I've selected my current account or the bank accounts that I'm going to be importing, it will give me the import file types. I can, as I said, choose to either use OFX or CSV. And for the sake of this session, I will use the OFX format. And then I need to specify my import file by simply clicking on the Browse button. There's my downloaded statement I have saved on my desktop. So I select that file, which is an OFX file. On the right hand side, I've got options for my date ranges. I can either choose to import all transactions, or I can choose to import for a specific date range which is existing on the downloaded file. Here I can then specify from date to date, then Pastel will only import transactions for the specified date ranges. But for the sake of today's session, I will select all transactions so that it imports all the transactions that are currently existing on this downloaded bank statement. The next option is to click on the import file button. I simply click on that button and Pastel will look at that file, go through the file, go through each and every transaction, and it will automatically pull through all the transactions. There we go. Awesome. It's done. It's here. All the transactions have been updated. Now all you need to do is do the account allocations so that Pastel knows which accounts to allocate it to. I will take you through the mapping field whereby Pastel can automatically detect, by setting up a specific trigger, Pastel can automatically detect that the next time you do a bank import, that it allocates the transaction automatically to an account. Now here's the list of my transactions. It will show me that there are 20 transactions that have been imported and currently displaying 1 of 10 lines, and there's 20 still to be displayed. Now the first column will show you the transaction date, the dates that exists on the OFX file or the downloaded file. Then the next column, which is what I'd need to manually change, is the type. Here I would need to choose or specify the account type, customer suppliers, was this a transfer or was this a tax refund or a tax payment. For the sake of this session, I will leave it as account. And the next column would then be for me to specify the selection of what account I'm using, and let's say it was computer expenses. So I'll choose my computer expenses. Now the reference number, as you can see, Pastel will generate these for you based on the date of each transaction. Now have a bit of method in your madness, if I can use that loosely, is just specify a reference number which you find unique to you and your business. Now Pastel has automatically generated reference numbers for me based on the date sequence. Now as you can see, the reference number starts with the year 2010-07, the transaction happened in the 7th month, and the date was the 27th, and this was transaction number 1. As you can see, I've got 5 transactions that happened on the 27th. So just to make your reference numbers unique. Now Pastel will then pull through a description as it is on the bank statements. It will pull through a transaction automatically. And is tax applicable on this transaction, yes or no? Let's say yes, tax is applicable at standard rated, and there we go. That's your full amount, which would be inclusive of the tax portion. And then you've got the minus button to remove the transaction, or you've got the map option. Now, the map option is also a very phenomenal utility. By simply clicking on that map button, Pastel now wants you to specify what sort of trigger should I look at when I'm importing transactions from my bank statement. What sort of description or information on the description should I pick up as a trigger, and then I will allocate to the computer expenses. Now, for the sake of the session, I will use purge. Now, purge is just an arbitrary example that I'm using. The reason why is because I've got a couple other transactions on my import file that have the description as purge. I'm not too sure if you can see it on your side, but I've got those first three transactions: purge S Ferndale, purge S Bryanston, purge S Chicken Licken, and so forth, McDonald's and Ferndale. Because those transactions already have that description, I'll use that purge as a trigger so that Pastel can automatically detect it. Now watch what happens once I've specified this trigger. I click on the OK button. Voila! Pastel has now looked through all your transactions and has now automatically allocated them all to computer expenses. It is just phenomenal. I mean, there's nothing else I could say, but yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal. It's allocated the account for you. The reference number you can still go in there and change. It's allocated the tax type, if tax is applicable, yes or no. And there we go. It's done. Now, once you're done with the first page, the first 10 transactions, you can click on Save and Next. Then it will take you through to the next list of transactions, and it will apply the same filter there as well, which is actually quite cool. Now, once you've allocated all your accounts, you need to ensure that all your accounts have been allocated, reference numbers are unique, and so forth. If you're setting up mapping, make sure your mapping is done, but you don't necessarily need to set it up here. I'll take you to where you need to set up your mapping now. Now, once you've allocated all your accounts, be it to customer, suppliers, items, transfers, and so forth, the next option for you would be to click on Process. Once you click on Process, Pastel will now update this bank account with the downloaded bank statements, and all the transactions will be imported and processed, and all the transactions will now show, taking you to the next step, which will be the simple process of reconciling. Now, if you're unhappy with this transaction, or maybe you want to import a new statement, maybe you imported the incorrect one, you can simply select the option to clear all. It will tell you that it will give you a confirmation window. You click on yes, and it will clear the import file. Then you can go through the whole process of downloading and importing a brand new statement, and you can then import it from there. Just waiting for Pastel to clear it. As you can see, now it has cleared it. I've got no import file. I can go through the process and do the import. Now, to do the mapping, under the bank options, there's the last option there that says Map Bank Statement Transactions. I simply click on that option. Now it will automatically take me to the last mapping that was done, which is the example that I did with you on the line. It was an account, it was a computer expense, tax is applicable, and this was the trigger, or what Pastel must pick up in the description. I can set it up as a priority. I can choose to remove or delete this mapping field. I'm going to add another field. Let's say it is a customer reference. I would specify an account, a customer account. There will be no tax applicable, as I said previously. And I can put in a trigger from what Pastel needs to read on the physical bank statements transaction. Excuse me. So maybe it will show as an invoice number, whatever. So wherever Pastel sees INV, then it will pick up that this is an invoice payment, or a payment done by customer Joe Soap, and Pastel will automatically allocate that transaction to customer Joe Soap automatically for you. Now, once I've set up all my mapping options here, I can click on Save. Now, the next time I go through the importing of my bank statements, transactions, Pastel will automatically do the allocations for you. It's phenomenal. It's easy. It just helps with making you more productive, making you more efficient, and just avoiding the human error element of having to not allocate tax when tax should have been allocated, and making sure that all transactions have been allocated accordingly. All your transactions have now been updated. They are sitting in your bank account. The last option now would be to do your bank reconciliation. Now, to go through the bank reconciliation, you click on the banking option, rather the reconcile bank and credit card options, which is what I've currently got highlighted now. Just waiting for your screen to update so you can see the screen on the view. I simply click on the reconcile banks and credit cards. When I click on that option to reconcile, it brings me to a new reconciliation window, which will come up shortly. Bring me to a new window where again I would then need to specify the bank account and so forth. Now just waiting for the screen to update. I apologize for the delay. Seems like my network is rather busy this morning, but I'm convinced that on your side it would be much quicker based on the number of users that are currently connecting. Looking on my side, I've got about 500, 600 odd employees currently accessing the internet, so it would generally slow down my internet connectivity. So I'm still waiting for that to update. Right, it's just taking a while. If you have any questions while I'm waiting for this, please feel free to pop those through to me so that I will address them as I go along, especially with my internet being so slow. It gives me a bit more time to go through those questions as well. Geez, it is actually very slow. Alright, but ultimately just to take you through it, while I wait for the screen to update, is the screen that comes up is a bank reconciliation screen where it will display all the transactions. I can choose to display all the previous transactions that have been reconciled previously. Remember, I took you through that option where you can choose to reconcile transactions automatically or not, or it will show me all my previous transactions that have been processed or maybe have been reconciled. Then I can choose to reconcile them. It will show me a list of all my transactions, including the ones that I did manually in the bank account, and also including all the transactions that I imported from my bank statement. Then I can just simply reconcile those transactions manually, and it will also specify the bank account balance, the date of the bank reconciliation that I'm doing, specify the date ranges, specify the date ranges, and then I can proceed with my bank reconciliation. Let me just reselect this option again. Okay, I'm going to reselect it again so that it updates. Great, and this is the screen that it brings you to. Firstly, as I said, you need to specify the bank account. Now here you notice that you cannot add on the fly. The reason being is that you wouldn't be reconciling a bank account that you haven't created that doesn't have transactions. So ultimately, at this stage, you will not be able to add on the fly because there would be no transaction that you have processed. So there's nothing that you're, in essence, reconciling. I'm going to choose my current account yet again. It will pull through the balance of my bank account, take into consideration all the transactions that I have updated or processed into my bank account. The next one is for me to specify the statement balance. Now this would be the statement's closing balance that I have from the physical bank account. So I'd specify here. In fact, let me leave the statement balance as 0 for now so that I can force it to reconcile at a later stage. So I leave it as 0. On the right hand side, Pascal then wants for me to specify the date. What transactions am I reconciling for? So it's just the date ranges from the 1st of November up until the 18th, which is including today's transactions. Then I can choose the option to display reconciled transactions, which is what I discussed while we're waiting for the screen to update. There we go. It pulls through a list of all the transactions that have been previously reconciled. Now these are the transactions. As you can see, the transactions have been reconciled, which means that they have gone through the bank account, and I would need to make sure that they are reflecting on my bank statement, my physical bank statement from the bank account. Now if you're looking on the right hand side of this bank recon screen, you will see that you're reconciled previously, where it will pull through your previous reconciled balance. So it will show you the previous statement balance ultimately that would have been reconciled and would have been in balance. Now the reconcile now, so these would be the outstanding transactions that have not been reconciled. If I had a list of transactions here that were not previously reconciled that I was simply going to tick at this stage, then it will show the total of those transactions here as the reconciled now transactions. Then I have the reconciled total, which will take into consideration the reconciled now entries. And then lastly, it will show me a difference. Ideally, I'd like to see a zero difference here, meaning that there is no difference between the pastel bank account and the physical bank account statements. Now, for me to force the statement to reconcile, I would then need to specify the statement balance on top. So I'll enter my statement balance here. There we go. Now by simply entering that statement balance, that full amount there, you'd notice on the bottom right hand side that the difference now is null or is zero, which means that pastel now agrees with my physical bank statement. And that takes care of your banking. Your banking is done, your transactions are done, it's been imported, your reconciliation is done, your pastel now reconciles to your physical bank statement. Now you can proceed to your next, whatever else that you need to do. At this stage, you can either print this bank recon and submit it to your bookkeepers, your financial manager, your director, whatever the case is. You can print this this bank recon to show that currently or as of this specific date, your bank recon was 100% in balance and it was reconciled, so pastel agrees and so forth. Or you can just simply choose to save the recon or save a new to process another bank recon either for the same bank account or for a different bank. For the sake of the session, I'm going to simply select on the save button. Great. That takes care of your banking. It's done, it's simple, and it's all been allocated for you. Tax has been done for you and so forth. So it's there for your functionality. It's there to make you, as I said, more productive, more efficient in your daily processing, especially the phenomenal utilities of importing your bank statements and also mapping those transactions. So guys, that sums up today's session.
Thank you for joining us for this My Business Online webinar. If you found it useful, please visit the Pastel website to find out about future My Business Online webinars or training courses. Alternatively, contact us on sales@pastelmybusiness.co.za.